We have somebody else in this discussion, Judith. She's listening in to all of this. Judith, you take a slightly different view, I know, from Bob in terms of the climate emergency, but do you think ULEZ is warranted?
Well, this is just classic, seeing this disagreement. Both statements from both sides have elements of truth, but both are wrong in not recognizing the other side. So what you have when the facts are disputed and the interpretations of the evidence disagree, well, you try to find common ground. You focus on, what are some sensible policies without having to rely on agreeing on, uncertain facts. And, the climate change issue is this in spades. The ULEZ is a microcosm of this disagreement. But with regards to climate change, we have to recognize that we have the climate crisis isn't what it used to be even a few years ago. The worst emissions scenarios are now off the table. The UN Conference of the Parties are now working off of a 2.5 degrees centigrade warming by the end of the 21st century, and we've already warmed by 1.2 degrees. The IPCC admits that the climate models are running too hot. Recent estimates of the climate sensitivity to carbon dioxide are increasingly lower. But the biggest problem is we've confounded the slow creep of warming with extreme weather events. The extreme weather events that we're seeing have little to no relationship with the slow creep of global warming. So we need
Judith.
to... Okay.
Thank you. I love the topic of climate change. It's so interesting, but it is also so confounding because you've got four people, in fact, in this conversation coming at it from all sorts of different angles and people saying this data, no, that's wrong, this data, that's wrong. Bob is shaking his head now to what you were saying with regards to warming. And I know that in terms of the way the climate scientists stand on this issue, you are somewhat of an outlier in this, aren't you?
Not really. What I have to say is, well, within the framework of the IPCC assessment report, it is not within the framework of all of the alarming rhetoric coming from the UN, journalists and alarmist politicians and environmental advocacy groups. I mean, we have a deeply complex, highly uncertain issue that we're trying to deal with. And the oversimplistic story that we're being fed by UN officials and by activists and advocates is just misleading us into a bad direction for urgently implementing policies.
Why?
That could be
why? What's the scheme, the strategy to do that?
Okay, this goes back decades into, there's a worldview from the UN Environmental Program back in the 1980s and 1990s. About degrowth, anti-capitalism, and so on. So there's a worldview that likes this. And very early on in all this, in 1992, we had a treaty, an international treaty to prevent dangerous human-caused climate change by eliminating fossil fuels before we had any evidence of unusual warming. So the policy cart has been way out in front of the scientific horse from the very beginning on it. We need to step back and rethink all this.